Number 13, which quotation from a philosopher's analysis of the politics would best support the student's claim? So just taking a peek at the text, we see the word claims here. So whatever our quotation is going to support, it's got to be this right here in particular. We will read the entire text, but of course the focus is on the claim as always, because that is what we need to support. And any aspects or features of it need to be represented by whatever our quote is going to be. So let's start at the beginning. A student in a political science course is writing a paper on Aristotle's The Politics, in which Aristotle offers his opinion on political instability and gives advice on how constitutions can be preserved. Aristotle observes that different forms of government can fall in different ways. For example, oligarchies might grant power to military leaders during wartime who refuse to relinquish that power during peacetime. But some methods of preserving order apply across all forms of government. The student claims, here we go, that in particular, Aristotle asserts that in a healthy state, obedience to law must be as close to absolute as possible, and that even minor fractions should not be ignored. So whatever our quote is, it has to support this part in particular. So let's see what we have. A. When constructing his argument regarding the characteristics of a well-functioning government, Aristotle asserts that transgression creeps in unperceived and at last ruins the state. So transgression here meaning kind of going against the law, more or less. Illustrating this idea with a comparison to frequent small expenditures slowly and almost imperceptibly chipping away at a fortune until it is ultimately depleted. I mean, this hits exactly what we wanted, right? Transgression meaning kind of going against the law will creep in unperceived, means it can kind of sneak in there. You may not notice people breaking the law. And as the next part talks about, this will happen slowly over time, bit by bit, until finally you realize, oh, we don't have a state anymore. There's no government anymore. So yeah, this works perfectly. Hits all the elements that we like. So I will check the rest of the choices, but I'm pretty confident that the answer is A here. B. When Aristotle writes on the necessity of avoiding corruption in government, he proposes that every state should be so administered and so regulated by law that its magistrates cannot possibly make money. In particular, he thinks oligarchies are particularly susceptible to corruption through bribery. So, first off, this seems a bit narrow. We're talking about just kind of going against law in general, not just, corruption. So it seems a bit narrow there. And even worse, we're specifically calling out oligarchies when the whole point of this discussion is it's not just about oligarchy. Oligarchy was mentioned in the previous bit when talking about specific forms of government may fail in specific ways. We're now talking about kind of general claims about how government overall, regardless of the form, can fail. So highlighting oligarchies here goes against this. We want to talk about governments in general. And going back to A, yeah, A does talk about governments in general. It's not talking about an oligarchy or this or that. It's governments in general have this problem described in A, which fits with what we wanted. So B is out. How about C? When Aristotle considers the health of constitutions, he states that constitutions are preserved when their destroyers are at a distance, and sometimes also because they are near, for the fear of them makes the government keep in hand the constitution. He holds that rulers who wish to see constitutions preserved must continually remind the populace of the dangers that would result from a constitutional collapse. So this is about the collapse of constitutions, the failure of government, but it's not about this idea of obedience to law. Right. In fact, it's more about like, what do you do with people who want to destroy the Constitution? People who want to usurp its power or create anarchy or whatever the case may be. How do you deal with them? So that is an issue that you'd have to deal with to preserve government, but that's not the issue described here. We're talking about obedience to law, and this part's important as well, which we saw in choice A, right? Even small infractions should not be ignored. This is more about how do you deal with people who are against the Constitution, who want to destroy it. And then it talks about how we got to remind people that it would be very bad if the Constitution collapsed or if the government collapsed. Again, not really relevant quite as precisely as we'd like to our claim, so we can get rid of C. D. When contrasting different forms of government, Aristotle holds that, again, we're talking about oligarchies, which doesn't seem good. Oligarchies may last not from any inherent stability in such forms of government, but because the rulers are on good terms with both the unenfranchised and with the governing classes. That is, oligarchic leaders who wish to hold on to power will introduce members of disenfranchised classes into government in a participatory role. First things first, this is about keeping government together. It's about government stability, which seems to be against the idea here. It also doesn't talk much about obedience to law and the problems with ignoring infractions. And like choice B, it talks about oligarchy specifically when we should be talking about governments in general. So yeah, D is out. Best answer is indeed choice A.